Welcome back to week 4 of Hope Groups. It is good to have you here with us. As always, Micah's going to be on your screen in just a few minutes for the group content, but before we hear from him, we're going to get the discussion going. Thank you for being here today.
All right, so the first question we have for you tonight is to think back to when you were a kid and think of something that you were afraid of. I know for me, I can distinctly remember being afraid of the dark. And so I can remember like being down in the basement and having to turn off the basement light and then sprinting up the stairs to escape and get back to where it was light. And so that's what it was for me. So think about, when you were a kid, what were you afraid of? Whether that was spiders or some big event or whatever that was, and talk about that with your group.
And after you guys share your answers on that question, we're going to kind of shift things to your current life, modern day. What are you afraid of now? What is something that brings anxiety into your present day life? Let's share that with your group. I know we are asking you to be a little bit more open and vulnerable with this one, but it is very valuable and it helps grow the relationships in the group. As well as it also gives you opportunity to process some actual real life stuff while in the safe space of your group. So go ahead and do that. And once you're done sharing your answers, Micah will be back on for your group content for this week.
Hey everybody, welcome to week 4 of the Hope Campaign. I'm glad that you're here. I think we're gonna have a good discussion today. So let's get right into it. Now, this week, we're discussing the source of our hope. Where does our hope come from? If you've been looking at any of the other Hope Campaign materials, if you've been reading the devotional, if you've been checking the website, maybe if you've come to Whitewater and heard some of the messages, you've heard a phrase that we've used repeatedly in this campaign, and it says, fear is the anticipation of evil, but hope is the anticipation of good. Fear is the anticipation of evil, but hope is the anticipation of good. Now, we haven't really unpacked that so far, so I want to take a little bit of time right now, and let's dive into that just a little bit and make sure we understand what we mean by that, and then we'll get into some other pieces. So when we say that fear is the anticipation of evil, that's not like a judgmental phrase. It's not meant to be anything other than a simple statement of fact. When I fear something, when I'm anxious about something, when there's something that causes me to worry, literally what that is that I am anticipating a negative event, right? When we say evil, a lot of times we mean some sort of like conscious thing that somebody's doing to us, but really anything bad is what we're talking about here. We say fear is the anticipation of a bad thing, right? Fear is the anticipation. When I see something coming at me that's a negative, it is a normal and natural and human response to experience fear. Not just is it normal and natural, it's actually very useful. Right? You're a pioneer, you're out in the, maybe you're here in Ohio 200 years ago and you're walking along and you see a bear coming at you. If you think, wow, what an interesting bear. It's so lovely. I love how that looks. Oh, look at the powerful jaws. And, it's not a good situation. Fear is a natural response in people and animals that is actually important. It protects us. Fear is not necessarily a negative thing. Anxiety, worry, these are not necessarily negative things. The problem with them is that they can easily hijack our thought processes and actually overcome all of the other good things that we're doing. So fear, if you're in a situation that should cause you to be healthily afraid, then it's good that you are healthily afraid, right? There's a lot of things in our world, if we're just being 100% honest with each other, there's a lot of things in our world that really are on their own worth fearing. If you just go through life and you're just blasé and you just, hey, whatever happens, happens, and I don't ever actually care. It could be that you're experiencing a life full of a lot of faith, but sometimes it's just like, no, you should probably be a little bit more worried about this, right? At the same time, fear shouldn't be the only thing in our life. If we anticipate bad things happening and only bad things happening, fear is a natural response. But, and this is the thing for those of us, especially those of us that are Christians, but really for all of us, fear is not the only thing that we should be anticipating, right? There's more to life than the bad stuff. Now, I know the bad stuff gets more play on TV, the bad stuff gets more play on cable news. It feels like all the time, it's like, man, everything is falling apart. The world is falling apart. Nothing's holding together. The center cannot stand. It's the end of the world as we know it. While fear is useful in certain circumstances, the reality is that hope is useful in all circumstances. There's never a time when you're worse off for having hope. Now, the classic quote that I actually like that we shortened down to get our pithy little saying, the classic quote is that hope is the joyful anticipation of good. Hope is the joyful anticipation of good. When there is something that I can look forward to, when there is something that I can look ahead and see, then it becomes easy for me to have hope. Now, fear is useful, but hope is more so, right? Because fear can tell me what to avoid. Fear can tell me how to stay safe, possibly. But I can never experience the fullness of life without hope. And that's what I want for you. That's what we want for each other, right? We don't want to just avoid pain. In fact, some of the most profoundly moving and amazing experiences of my life have come as I've gone through pain. If I had avoided those things because I was afraid of the pain, then I would have missed out on some amazing opportunities. So what I want for you is more than just avoidance of pain. What I want for you is flourishing. Jesus said that he came to give us life, that we could experience life to the full, right? To give us life, that we could experience life to the fullness of what God could dream for us. And that's a beautiful promise. That is something that I hold to on hard days. Now, we started to hint on this last week, right? We looked at the 23rd Psalm, we looked at it together, and we found out that at the very core of the 23rd Psalm is this promise that says, God is with me. God is with me. God is with you. God is with us. God is with us in the middle of hardship and in the middle of beauty, in the middle of our losses and in the middle of our wins. God is never far from us. And that fundamentally is the hope that we're going to talk about today. The hope that no matter what happens, that we go through it with God. Jesus says that those who hear his words and put them into practice are like a man who builds his house on a rock. That no matter what happens, the storms that come, they will not blow him away. They will not wash him away. That his house will always be firm because his foundation is stable. And that's really what we're going to talk about. What is our hope in really? Is your hope in the promotion that you're hoping to get? Is your hope for your life built around your circumstances? Is it built around your family? Is it built around your dreams for your kids, right? Or your dreams for yourself? Is your hope in life built around something financial? My retirement plan? Around a hobby? Around a sports team? What do you actually put your hope in? Because I'm telling you, if you put your hope in the wrong thing, it's like building a house with no foundation. It's like building a building on top of sand. But if your hope is in God, specifically, if your hope is in Jesus Christ, and if you build your life on his words and what he teaches, then we have hope and so much more. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. We're going to take a quick short break, and then we're going to get into kind of the meat of today's conversation. So talk about the questions on your screen, and then let's jump and get ready to dig, because we got some good stuff coming. All right, thanks, guys. See you in a minute. All right, welcome back. Now, this is week 4. I feel like we've built up some camaraderie, right? Like you like me a little bit, and I'm going to push you today. I'm going to cash in the chips that I've earned, and I'm going to poke you just a little bit today, because I think that we as Christians in America, or if you're here and you're not a Christian, then you can just laugh at all the Christians here. But if we as Christians in America have some ideas that are probably wrong and destructive, and I'm going to poke on them a little bit today. All right? So there is we'll call it evangelical marketing circles, there is a verse that is hugely popular that we get wrong all the time, all right? The verse is found in the Old Testament. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, but I've seen this on throw pillows. I've seen it, a ton of people tell me it's their life verse. I've seen it on like cool little decorated wood crate things, like the pallet wood, where it's painted and people draw on it. I've seen it in vinyl cutouts. It's just a great Etsy, HGTV type verse to put around your house. The problem is that most people that quote it have never actually looked to see what it's talking about. And so we're going to talk about that today. If this is your favorite verse, I hope you still like me when we're done. All right, the verse is Jeremiah. It's found in the book of Jeremiah, which is one of the prophets in the Old Testament. It's Jeremiah 29:11. Now, you might not, I think I've heard that before, but as I start saying it, I bet most of the people in your group can follow it. Jeremiah 29:11 says this, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And I love that. I do love that verse. And I love that for a lot of people, this is a verse that gives us hope, right? God has plans for us, plans to prosper us and not to harm us, plans for a hope and a future. Anytime I'm looking forward at a future event with hope, that's a good thing, all right? But what I see a lot of is I see people thinking like, man, I think I'm going to get that promotion because God has plans to prosper me and not to harm me. Man, I think that this sale of my house is going to go through just the way I want to. I'm going to get this much money for it because God has plans to prosper me and not to harm me. Hey, I think that this sickness is never going to touch my family because God has plans to prosper me and not to harm me, right? All of those things are not bad things to hope for, but we should really be clear on understanding what the verse says and what it doesn't. And so we're going to dive deep into this passage in just a minute. Let me give you a little bit of background. The prophet of Jeremiah is one of the most unpopular prophets to read, other than this chapter in the Old Testament, because his book is really depressing. His book chronicles the overthrow of the nation of Israel by conquerors, invaders who came in. And it's depressing because Jeremiah keeps saying the same thing again and again and again, right? And he keeps not being heard by God's people. Because God's people would say, hey, God loves us no matter what. He'll always take care of us. And so even if we turned away to idols for a while, even if we stop worshiping him, even if we do things our own way, he's always going to take care of us because he already has, right? They're saying essentially what we talked about a couple weeks ago. We have a history book with God, and God has always come through for us, and so we know he always will. So even though these armies are invading our nation, we know that God will take care of us. And you think, well, that's faith. That's beautiful. That's good. But Jeremiah gets the unpopular job of saying, no, actually, God has saved you many times, but God's best for you is not the best that you're hoping for. Right? God's best for you is not what you actually want. And so he says this right up until the armies invade, break through the gates of Jerusalem, and start carrying people off in slavery, right? And he's actually accused of being a collaborator with the Babylonian armies. Like, it's not a good situation. And so Jeremiah gets captured. A lot of people get captured. People get taken to Babylon. This is where we get stories about Daniel being carried to Babylon and things like this. And so God's people are taken into exile. But even in exile, they still have this hope. And they say, man, okay, God, we were wrong. You know, we really messed this up. And you told us, you've been warning us for 100 years that this was going to happen if we didn't shape up. And you really showed us, God, we were wrong. Now we're here. We're very contrite. We're so sorry for what we did. Take us home, please. Right? And there were a number of, Jeremiah calls them false prophets and seers, who were making a really good living by telling people, yeah, God is just around the corner. God's going to take this. He's going to somehow get all of us, thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of people, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people that have been carried into exile. God is going to take all of us back home any day now. It's going to be, we've been here for several months already, and it's probably going to be several more months. But man, shortly, within the first year or two, really, we're all going to be home. Right? It's all going to go easy. It's all going to go well. God's going to take us out of here. We don't need to settle down. We don't need to do anything because we're not here for very long, right? God's going to take us home. And Jeremiah writes this letter that's found in Jeremiah 29, and this is what it says. All right? If you've got a Bible, feel free to pull it out. If you're a Bible Gateway guy or a YouVersion app, on your phone, feel free to get this out. Jeremiah 29. We're going to read the whole thing. It's a little bit long, but stay with me because I think you'll follow. All right? This is the text of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This is after King Jehoiakim and his queen mother, the courts, all these people had gone into exile in Jerusalem. He entrusted the letter to a certain person, and this is what the letter says. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. And everyone thinks it's about to be, hey, come on home. Come on home. Come back to Jerusalem. Life is good. He says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there and do not decrease. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, then you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams as they encourage you to leave. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When 1 year is completed, no. When 2, when 3, when 70 years are completed, I'll bring you home. No, that's not what it says. It says, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me to come and to pray to me, and I will listen to me. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from the nations and places where I have banished you. I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Now it goes on, and there's a lot more that we could read. We're not going to read the full chapter, but do you catch what happens here? That the people of Israel are saying, man, surely nothing bad's going to happen to me right now. Surely only good things, because God has a plan for me. God has a perfect plan for my life, and he does. But for Israel, in this time and in this place, God's good and perfect plan for their life included 70 years in exile. God's plan was not the plan that they wanted, right? Nobody's signing up for this plan. God's plan is, yeah, I will take care of you and I will be faithful to you and I will fulfill my promises to you eventually. But I'm not saying it's going to be today. And so this is a hard thing for us. It's a hard thing for us. Because when we put, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. When we put that on a throw pillow and stick that on our couch, when we say that's our life verse, when we put that on some shiplap and put it up on a HGTV special, I'm sympathetic to the hope that expresses. But we need to recognize that in its context, what God is actually saying is, I will be faithful to you, more faithful to you than you have been to me. He says, I'll be faithful to you, but it's going to be a while, right? God's faithfulness does not always mean that everything happens to us in exactly the way that we want it to. And that's hard if our hope is actually in our own wish fulfillment. This is the thing that we have to get to. What is the source of our hope? If our hope is fundamentally that we will get everything that we want, I have bad news for you. You will be disappointed. And fundamentally, we all want what we want, right? The heart wants what it wants, and I'm not opposed to that. I get that. But if we don't understand what God actually promises us, then what can happen is it can turn our hearts towards bitterness. It can turn our hearts towards anger. We can feel like it's unfair that we didn't get the thing, that God didn't come through for us. He wasn't faithful to his promises. He didn't care for us. And that's a problem. The hope that we have should not be based on how good we are, how likely we are to get what we want, how likely we are to be able to get there. It should even not be based on how likely God is to give us what we want. Our hope should actually be that God will give us what we need. A lot of times what we need is not what we want. Now, God did amazing things through the people of Israel in their time in exile. Now, if you read the Old Testament, if you read the narratives of the Old Testament, it felt like every other chapter, Israel is turning and going away after these other gods, right? All through, starting with Judges and even before, but all through all the time of the kings in Israel, you continually see this thing where Israel is constantly chasing after idols. And you would think like, this is how it is. This is what it is. But then when you get to the New Testament, it's completely different. Israel has a completely different set of problems. And that is that they're rigidly holding to the law. And you think, how did you go from here to here? Like, if you just read it, if you just read some of the stories in the Old Testament of Israel chasing after idols and going their own way and doing all their own thing, and then you read stuff in the New Testament, you think, is this the same group of people? Like, what was the process by which these people who couldn't follow God for 10 minutes in a row without going after some other idol, all of a sudden became these super hardcore, very, very serious about doing everything that they thought that God had commanded them to do? Like, what was the process of that? And the short answer is that the process was exile. That God formed in the nation of Israel something that was more conducive to his heart, even though Jesus, when we read the parables of Jesus, he's hard on the Pharisees, and rightly so. But that was still an improvement over what had gone before, right? God used hardship in the life of the nation of Israel to form a level of character in them that could be formed in no other way. God sees the long view, and we only see the short view. And while we're primarily focused on our prosperity, right, on our comfort, on our safety, those are not the things that are at the top of God's pile. God's ultimate hope for us collectively and for you individually is not just that you'll be prosperous and safe and life will go easy for you, comfortable, right? God's hope for us, God's plan for us, the plan that he has to prosper us and not to harm us, is not necessarily a material prosperity. It's for you to become a different type of person, right? A person with a character that's so deep and so strong that right now you might not even be able to imagine it. Or some of you say, no, it's easy for me to imagine because I've gone through this, right? God has been at work in my life, not always making me comfortable, but always making me a better follower of him. And that is actually the source of our hope. It's in God's goodness and his ability to take the long view and give us ultimately what we need, not just what we want. Now, in the moment, that can be very difficult, right? When I'm going through a hard place, when I'm going through, as we talked about last week, the valley of the shadow of death, then what I really want is hope in the immediate, right? I want to know that the pain is going to go away. I want to know that the fear is going to go away, right? I want to know that this evil that is approaching, I'm going to avoid it in some way, somehow. But when we say hope is the anticipation of good, the good that we're talking about is in the longest possible term, in the strongest possible way, not in the short term, not in the immediate. Now, I think that God is active even in the immediate. We're going to talk about that some next week. But I think that ultimately our hope is in what is to come. So let's go ahead and pause there. We'll have a little bit more discussion, and then we've got an extended conversation that we'll have to wrap up our time today. So we'll do that now, and then when you come back, there'll be a couple of us here to talk about what's coming next. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Hey guys, we hope that you had a meaningful time with your group tonight. Before we go, we have a challenge for you.
All right, so one of the things that we think is really important when being part of a spiritual community like this is to be praying for each other. And so maybe this is something you've already been doing each week, but if not, the challenge this week is to close out the night with prayer. Pray for each other. We talked tonight about sometimes God doesn't always answer prayer instantly as much as we would love that. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes even decades to see the fulfillment of God's promises. So we challenge you to pray over that reality this week and over that reality of other people in your group who are still waiting for God.
So we're looking forward to seeing you back here next week for week 5. In the meantime, be on the lookout for details about the upcoming Songs of Hope Night of Worship. It's going to be a wonderful time of music and prayer. All right, see you guys next week.